Welcome to the Writer Reads The Reptiles Blade, Part 2. Nervous laughter greeted him, and he rewarded it with a drop-jawed lizardine smile before continuing. No doubt, then, you will later bid for access to me, my technology, and my knowledge, and this humanitarian organization will gain a much-needed injection of funds to pour into its business plan. Felix became aware of the sudden tension near the lectern on the dais, of the way John Saunders raised his hand over a particular point, as though he could shut Micah's interview down at any time. Micah must have noticed too, for he changed topic with the speed of one who desperately needed to get his message across. I am a native of the world you call Aquapearl, a diplomat of sorts. Spy, muttered someone representing a technological research company. Assassin, muttered a syndicate member. Saboteur, commented one of those standing with the mineral exploration group. Micah acknowledged the comments with brief tilts of his head. There are other less savory terms for some of the tasks I do, he agreed, and once again drew smiles. But first, I thought I would talk a little to you about my race and what we are. We are chameleons of the worst sort. We can hide in plain sight, alter our skin to match our backgrounds, bend light to blend in. Of course, we wouldn't do that with our clothes on, so we had to develop other means of hiding our more offensive attributes. Micah paused, appearing to enjoy the looks of surprise, shock, and curiosity on his audience's faces. Then he hid his amusement and continued. The truth is, our forms are a relic of our earlier days. While your ancestors were prancing about scratching their dangly bits in public, we already had a built-in physiological means of keeping ours out of sight and out of the way of branches and other things we might get caught on. It was a long time before our clothing technology caught up with the rest of us, but our battle armor is the best in the known worlds. As he said it, Micah reached up and touched the center of his breastbone, the point directly over his heart. He was smiling as the suit snapped around him. He was showing fangs as the visor dropped into place. He was gone before the guards could react. Felix stared open-mouthed at the space he'd occupied. When had the lizardine developed that little trick? The one where the force bars melted out of existence to allow an armored warrior to pass, and then snapped back into reality once more. And since when could a suit of battle armor remain invisible and undetected during capture and incarceration? And Carlyle grabbed her by the arm and dragged her down closer to the floor. Shielding her with his body, he dragged her to one side of the room, but not back toward the door they'd come in by. Behind them, one of the syndicate guards noticed what they were doing and followed. The other agency's members were nowhere in sight. Taking advantage of the uproar, no doubt, Felix wished them luck and let Carlyle destroy the door lock to get her through. The syndicate members followed, closing the door behind them. They all hit the floor when the door blew inwards. So much for the reptiloid being unarmed and harmless, Felix thought as the air moved above them. Micah was as invisible as he'd been when he'd left the dais. Don't shoot! Carlyle shouted and slapped the syndicate guard's wrist. Across the hall, a large hole shattered into existence, drawing startled shouts and revealing the laboratory beyond. Felix grinned. At least she and Carlyle hadn't been the only ones to sneak weapons past the Institute's security system. Can you get us out of here? She asked, loudly enough for the camera sound feed to pick it up. Carlyle caught her drift. I don't know. They didn't exactly give us a map to follow. Blatant lie though it was, they both looked about as though trying to get their bearings, drawing a growl of frustration from the syndicate group. Bloody civilians, one grumbled, while the bodyguard Carlyle had kicked gave them a calculating stare. Take us out of here, Collins. Collins. Now Felix had a name to go with the bodyguard's face. It probably wasn't his real one, but you never knew your luck. For his part, Collins looked like he wanted to argue with his employer, but he didn't. With his face creased into a frown, he guided his masters past Felix and Carlyle taking only a minute to lean in and deliver a warning. "I know what you're up to," he said, "and I don't like it." He didn't notice Carlyle's light-fingered interference that deposited the door-destroying device in his pocket. Felix did, and struggled to maintain her expression of feigned innocence. Colin's employers didn't give her a second glance as the guard led them unerringly down the corridor, taking a left at one intersection, then two rights and a sharp left to bring them to an emergency exit. That it was the fastest route out of the building was clear from the burnt remnants of the door dangling from its hinges. The lizardine must have passed that way too. They clattered down a short flight of stairs and into an open quadrangle fenced in by four buildings. Good one, Collins, Felix thought. "You do know you're trespassing, don't you?" Saunders asked, emerging from across the courtyard with half a dozen security officers moving in his wake. "We got lost," Collins said. "And yet you were able to move unerringly to the only exit in this wing. Something my employers are curious about." "You can't hold us," Collins' master said, and Saunders favoured him with an amused look. "We could," he said, "but we won't. All we ask is a little time with your man here. The rest of you can leave." "Will we get him back?" The amusement disappeared from Saunders' face. "Perhaps." "Unharmed?" Colin's boss had obviously chosen to ignore the lack of a definite yes. Collins switched his gaze from one to the other. His face showed disbelief and uncertainty, and he took a step away from his master. The sniper, sitting at the window 2 floors above, did not miss. The first Felix or Carlyle knew he was there was when a highly pressurized dart embedded itself in Collins' back. He folded, unconscious, before he hit the ground. "Is he dead?" his employer asked. Saunders raised his eyebrows. "Does it matter?" he replied, and gestured to where his dark-haired assistant had appeared at yet another door. "Kylie will show you out. Our apologies for any inconvenience you have suffered while visiting." "You too," he added, looking at Felix and Carlyle. "Collins is the only one we want to speak to." Felix noted his use of the guard's name and was certain the camera feed had picked up a falsehood in the corridor. Not so certain Collins' warning had gone unheard, but willing to pretend as long as their hosts were willing to ignore it. They made it to the street in quick time, Kylie not bothering with the niceties of a guided tour, but hurrying them past glass-windowed laboratories, through an open-plan office, and back to the foyer. After showing the syndicate men where their car was, Kylie turned to Felix and Carlyle. "We ran your faces," she said. "It would be best if you didn't return, Captain, Lieutenant." Some of Felix's surprise must have shown, because Kylie went on to explain. "It wouldn't do to have any government officials disappear while they visited our humanitarian research centre. It might affect our funding," she said, and walked back into the building. Felix and Carlyle looked at where their car had been brought round to the foot of the stairs. There was more than one way they could disappear. "We can catch a cab," Carlyle said, and led Felix down the stairs furthest from the vehicle. "Or a bus," Felix suggested, "from outside Casey's." Casey's was on a busy thoroughfare about 5 blocks away. They could reach it by walking down the bustling shopping strip and crowded streets. "Casey's," Carlyle said, and they strolled down the stairs together, Felix resisting the urge to run. 2 blocks later they paused in front of a chocolate shop. "Are they still there?" Felix asked. "I've hit the beeper," Manx said. "Bus is too far away." "How long?" Behind them, the 3 men, 2 women, and a large dark van that had shadowed them from a block out of the Institute surged toward them. "Time to go," Carlyle said. "And we're dirty, by the way." "Uh-huh." Felix had already worked out they'd been bugged. She just hadn't figured out when. Fortunately, the crowded sidewalk and heavy traffic slowed their pursuers enough for Carlyle and Felix to step out of the chocolate shop alcove, hurry past a nearby noodle shop, and duck down an alley. Carlyle muttered something under his breath, and Felix bent closer to hear him. 6. Pause. 5. Pause. 4. An engine revved behind them. 3. Felix looked back and saw the van and its escort turn into the alley. 2. Carlyle laid a hand on her upper arm, wrapping his fingers around it. An engine roared from the other end of the alley. One. Carlyle began to run, dragging Felix with him. Move your ass, Jay! Felix moved, running blindly with him, straight at the garbage truck coming down the alley toward them. Behind them, confusion broke out, but it didn't matter. Felix concentrated on her headlong run at the truck, steeling herself for the sudden avoidance she was sure Carlyle had planned. They were a metre off its bumper, with the truck driver shouting vitriol but not bothering to slow down, when Carlyle veered right, yanking Felix after him. He pulled her tight against his chest and spun so that he stood between her and the alley as the truck roared past. It was barely clear when he released her and pulled her into the alley behind it.